Hello, welcome to the True Blue Quilts sewing studio. We are going to have a fun morning of scrap busting, Stashbuster blocks. I have quite a few projects in the works, and I always end up with scraps, and I can't bear to throw anything away. So I just collect them, and I have a whole bucket. Um, Let me get some pieces here behind me to show you. I save my half square triangles from binding, from flying geese blocks, all sorts of things. And what I end up doing with them is sewing them into hourglass blocks. And I did a video last summer that I will go back and link in the community tab. So look for that post with that video link soon. Later today, after the live stream is over. I gave you some ideas for what to do with hourglass blocks, and I thought I would just continue that theme. I spent some time pressing my previously sewn hourglass blocks. So here's the process. I get leftover triangles. I throw them in a basket. I sew pairs together as leader enders in between other projects to come up with hourglass blocks. Those get thrown in a basket. And then I end up with a stack like this. So I spent some time this morning ironing the hourglass blocks and trying to sort them by color, because there are some scrapbuster projects where you just throw everything together and it ends up being one of these wonderfully crazy scrappy quilts with all the colors all mixed, and it's good to go. I prefer a more controlled palette, and so I like to sort things by color. So you can see here at the top of my stack, I've got my yellow hourglass blocks, and I want to welcome Sandy. Good morning. Glad you are with me to sew a little bit here on the first Saturday of the month. Is a time I have set aside to just hang out in my sewing room and get together. And I've got my little backdrop here trying to contain some of the mess. That can be a trigger for some people that just can't stand seeing a messy area, but I've got my workspace ready to go. So I've pressed all my hourglass blocks, but I didn't have time to trim and get ready. So we're going to do a little bit of kind of improv piecing, and we'll see how that goes together. And one of the other things I try to do, I lost my train of thought completely. When I'm doing a scrappy project, I like to have a consistent background or some kind of theme. And so the theme I wanted to build with these kind of scrappy hourglass blocks was a gradient with the sashing strips. Obviously, it's going to take quite a while to get this little block up to a usable quilt size. So I've got a plan for what I'm doing with the hourglass blocks, but then I need some borders and sashing. And so what I did is I went to my Island Batik bucket and found my white, my gray, and a dark print. I used the solid black for a backing, so I didn't have that with the yardage of white and gray. But there is a print on here. I promise it's not showing up very well, but this was, you can almost see the little bit of dark gray. They're footprints, animal footprints on this fabric from the Backcountry collection. Anyway, so I have strips cut to use as borders and sashing. And I just imagine that we'll have these scrappy hourglass blocks and the consistent gradient of frames excuse me, going from light to dark with that white, gray, and black. So let's get started. I've got a little scrap bucket to use as my trash can here because, as I said, I haven't trimmed these all to consistent sizes. With scrappy piecing, I just want to use things up. I don't necessarily aim for a consistent size until I put them together. So what I am going to do is be very loosey-goosey and just eyeball things. And the air, and when I am working with these hourglass blocks, I'm just going to keep matching light to dark. So one hourglass yellow will stand up and one hourglass yellow will be on its side. So I can sew those together and then get my next set ready. Hello, Heidi. Good to see you. I'd love to hear what you guys are working on as I am sewing my hourglass blocks together. I am going to take a pause and trim some more dog ears. And then I can sew. And I'd love to hear some more feedback on what your thoughts are when you hear about Scrapbuster quilt blocks in your stash. That would take a little bit of planning to get consistent sizes of units together. Or are you kind of like me and you've got all these bits and pieces and you're trying to put them together in another way? So I had my 4 yellows and I have one left over, so we'll set that aside. I am trying to work in groups of 4, just because you can then make a 4 patch. Yeah, I'm sorry, Sandy. I got a notice that my internet was unstable, so it did come back. I appreciate your patience as we have some of these connection issues. And then I'm looking at my fabrics and I've got 3 of the same kind of green pattern there, and then 1 that is different. So I'm going to try and find some more different ones so that it doesn't look like there's one oddball. Anytime there's one oddball, I always try and pair it up and match it with something so that we get a variety, or have 2 the same and 2 oddballs. I'm going to drop out of the frame. I dropped my scissors. I have to lean over and pick those up. So I'm going to trim these dog ears so I can get this next set of blocks going together. When you are working with leftover triangles from one project, they will go together and make consistent hourglass blocks. When you're throwing a bunch of different scraps from different projects together, that's when you can get some kind of wild sizes, and we'll get that going. So I'm just going to work through my scrap bin here with these hourglass blocks, and we can chat about whatever quilt stuff is on your mind. I'm Andy, and this is True Blue Quilts. I love to make scrappy quilts, usually with a consistent color scheme. But there's, exceptions to every rule. I love to quilt, and there's so many different techniques and blocks and styles to try that we've just got to experiment a little bit. So you can see here in my greens, I ended up with 2 that are different sizes. So I may try to just line that up and trim that big one down because it is the oddball size here. And I'm working with scissors and hand trimming everything, you know, very old-fashioned of me, just because it's hard to get up and down and use a rotary cutter when I am on camera. So one might say, Andy, you should plan a little better for these, but these are just casual sewing days. So I'm not going to stress too much about prep time and getting things ready. So yeah, when you are a scrappy quilter, you do have to understand your style a little bit before you get going. Are you going to be one of those controlled palette type of people? Then you would want to keep things sorted by colors and sizes. Or are you just going to be one of those random improv people, and then you have a little more leeway with what you're doing? I'm looking around. I must have buried it. I had a pinwheel project that I made years and years ago as a Scrapbuster kind of project, and I haven't quilted it yet. Oops. I use a little tab for a leader ender sometimes, and I don't want to, not ready to throw that away yet. And as I'm working here, I'm just going to finger press my blocks, and then we'll have our first. Let me sew it on this side. Those edges are a little better. Seams a little more even. And whenever I'm joining those 4-patch blocks, I do like to throw a pin in on the seam just to keep that lined up. These aren't supremely accurate blocks because they were, you know, leftover triangles, and I just was improv piecing and not really worrying about cutting things to an exact size. So they will turn out a little bit wonky, but I do like that center seam to line up a little bit. Hello, hello. Good morning, Sheila. Welcome. This is True Blue Quilts. I am working on hourglass scrappy blocks this morning as my Scrapbuster project. Everybody wanted to see scrappy blocks, so I just am putting these wonky hourglass blocks that I have made with leftover triangles. I'm putting those all together, and I'm going to frame them. So I've got my first 4-patch done. I'm just using some scissors to trim because I didn't want to get out my rotary cutter and stuff. And this is just kind of an improv wonky project. I did pre-cut some strips for borders. So I'm going to go ahead and just lay that 4-patch on my long strip and feed it through and go on to the next piece. So I'm just finger pressing my units as I sew them together. And like I was saying, when I was trying to, let me just get this together while I'm thinking about it, matching up seams, and then I will continue my thought. I have to sew it together to show you what I was talking about, having three of similar and one of different gives you a very oddball look. I try to balance the scrappiness a little bit more so that it comes across as a little more consistent or coherent. It doesn't have that just wild, crazy, everything in the kitchen sink type of look. But I didn't really achieve my goal on this block. But you know what? With scrappy projects, it's one of those anything goes kind of things. So I've gotten down to my next color of purples. And I am just going to trim those dog ears. And again, I've got 3 similar and 1 oddball. So I guess that's going to be the theme today. We'll just have oddball blocks in our oddball units in our 4 patches. And I was thinking today about quilting personalities, that there are the very type A quilters, very precise. They measure everything. They trim all their dog ears, all their loose threads, and their patchwork looks beautiful all the time. And then there's the loosey-goosey quilters on the other end of the spectrum who just kind of randomly throw things together. And both styles of quilts are beautiful. The very precise, lovely quilts and the more random improv wonky style comes through. It just, there's something for everyone in the quilt world. So find your style, do what you love, is kind of my mantra here. So I sewed, I've got lots of blocks going as I chain piece. So I've got my pairs that I'm putting together. I've finished a 4-patch, and I've got one that I'm adding a border to. Like I said, I'm working very improv today. So I've got my long border strip. I sewed one side. I'm going to just trim with scissors, and then I can flip that around and sew my next border side onto that strip. So we will do that. And even these solids are batiks. Island Batik has a line of solid colors. And the great thing about working with batiks is that there's no right side or wrong side. So especially for sashing strips, I can just, grab and go. Drink your water. Okay, so let me get this green block together, and I will show you what I meant about really scrappy, the variety of scrappiness. And you don't have to follow any particular rules, but I like to set some guidelines for myself when I'm sewing scrappy blocks, and this one's not. Come on. Sometimes they don't like to cooperate when you've got crazy seams coming together. And now I'll start my next color. I've got some pretty blue to work with. Of course, that's my favorite color here at True Blue Quilts. So I like to set some guidelines for myself when I am working on scrappy projects, whether it's going to be monochromatic or everything in color order, or classic color pairings, red and green, blue and yellow, those kind of ideas. Are we going to pair everything with white? Think about, make some of those decisions ahead of time, and then you can spend more time sewing and less time worrying about, what the next step is. Okay, so I wanted to illustrate my concept of oddball pieces and that idea of having a consistent theme within your scrappiness. So when everything is different, you can, or when everything is the same, one oddball stands out. So if you have two different things, then it kind of plays with that theme of things being different. And let me check the comments here. Sandy is asking what size blocks. These were around probably 2 1/4 or triangles cut from 2 1/4, 2.5 inch strips, because that's what I use for my binding, and most of my scrap triangles come from binding. So then once you get all the seams together, these little hourglass units are just over 2 inches. And now my 4 patch is right around 4 inches. So they're pretty small. I'm trying to, I'm adding some 1 inch borders. So these are going to be pretty small blocks. But, I've got a ton of them to use up. So that's why I could even go out to a 9 patch hourglass. But as I was saying, let me talk about my color choices again. So I cut several triangles from similar fabrics, and those two on the bottom are from the same fabric. And then this darker green really stands out. This lighter green is a similar shade, but a different print than this bottom one. So I do have 3 different fabrics in this block, but it doesn't come across that way. This dark green is going to really stand out in that block. So not the best choice for the way I like to work. I either like everything to be similar or everything to be different. 3 and 1, you know, 3 similar, 1 different really stands out. It's that old Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. This one is a much better scrappy variety. So I have 2 of similar background, but the greens are a little bit different. And then I've got this one where the 2 lighter backgrounds are different shades. One is a cream and one is a light green. And that light green kind of matches the background of that wild block. So a little better job keeping everything different. So those are my 2 green blocks. Let me check the comments here and see how people are doing. Heidi's another loosey-goosey quilter. And she's off to the Long Beach Quilt Show. Well, have a fantastic time, Heidi. I have a lot of my designer friends are over in Long Beach. My daughter went back to school this week, so it was not a great time to get away to Southern California, even though that's an easy drive from Phoenix. So I'm actually planning to head over to the Southern California area in January for Road to California. So maybe I'll see you there if I can get those travel plans coordinated well enough. And yes, Heidi threw her scraps all together into a coordinating pillow top. Yeah, it coordinates but doesn't match. That's a great idea. I love it. I love it. Just so you can see where I'm going with these, I'm going to take these gray blocks and put them on a gray frame. So I can get my gradient different color frames and my silly internet connection. Hang with me, guys. It'll come back. So yeah, my sewing room is in a back corner of the house, and sometimes the internet goes. I am plugged in. I'm not working on, so that does help a little bit. Not to have just a freestanding camera that I'm trying to upload to, but if we get disconnected, please come back. I'm here for a couple hours. So just sewing away, trying to get my scrappy hourglass bin under control. So we talked about the precise quilters and the loosey-goosey quilters. And then I'm thinking of the very social quilters. If you've ever been to a group sewing day, there seems to be, well, again, there's 2 personalities. You've got the productive person that just is head down, pedal to the metal, sewing, wants to get projects finished. And I tend to be that way because I work full time. My daughter's in high school. We have a very busy life. And so when I get some dedicated sewing time, I just want to go and get stuff done. But then there's the socialite, the social butterfly person who's visiting with everyone, making the rounds, sitting down, chatting with people, asking about their projects. And that is a big component of those social sewing times too, is actually the social time. So if we are ever sewing together, do not be afraid to interrupt me, because I do like to chat with my quilting friends. So yeah, like I said, I like to set guidelines for myself, like all the squares are going to be different within my chosen color scheme, and then I totally violate my own rules, like when I say they're all going to be different and I end up with 3 similar color combinations. And I'll show you what I mean, because this purple one worked out the same way. So I make the rules and immediately break them. But it's quilting. It all goes, everything goes together in the end. It's not a problem. So like I said, I've got these red and blue blocks, and this one guy is going to be the oddball because that is actually a teal fabric that doesn't play well with these others. So when I get enough in my my outcast pile, then those can become their own block. Although I may not want to do that because then I'd have 2 reds and only 1 yellow. So we'll set those aside to decide later. But I've got 4 similar. Again, I end up with 3 and 1. So these 3 are all the same color combination, and then I've got this one that's got a different. But you know what? We'll call this the one different quilt, where all these 4 patches have 3 the same and 1 different component. I love to make blocks because I love to finish something and feel like I've made something, and finishing a block is a great feeling. But then the whole quilt never gets together because I'm so busy making blocks. So that's kind of funny. And I have an AccuQuilt Go, and I'm wondering if I can use one of the small dies, like the 4-inch die, to just run these through and get consistent block sizes. Because you can see, I'm going to line up the corners here on these units. There's 3 different hourglass units there. You can see that they are not the same size. And I think what I will do is just, what do I want to do with that one? You know, it's all scrap fabric, so I don't know why I'm worried about cutting large blocks down. So we'll just sew it together and worry about it at the end. You know, like if anybody remembers Scarlett O'Hara, tomorrow, we'll worry about that tomorrow. Sewing these hourglass units can be kind of a pain, and I will tell you why. Because you are starting in a corner where there's already a lot of bulk, so trying to get that started through the sewing machine can be kind of a challenge. That's why I do like chain piecing, because you can hold on to the piece that's already fed through the needle and just give that not really a tug. You're not really pulling on it. You're just giving it some firm pressure to get that next piece started through your sewing machine. So here we've got my long chain of stuff. I've got my blue hourglass units coming together. I started sewing my green hourglass units on gray background. So I just put 2 squares together on the same strip of sashing, and so I can just trim those apart. Yes, there's still a little bit of sashing that's not, it wasn't perfectly lined up because this is wonky improv sewing. So that can go with that. And then I've got my purples that I said we had 3 in 1. And let me try to spin that seam so that bulk goes, is distributed a little bit. That would be my recommendation on these hourglass blocks. If I could train myself to press everything open, I'd have a little bit easier time with some of that bulk. So when I say I am spinning my seams, I am opening up that center so that each seam continues around the pinwheel. I am going clockwise around that block. So then that center seam, it's still bulky, but it's not going to just be this huge mountain that I have to get over when I eventually quilt things. The other trick when you are quilting bulky stuff is if you're custom quilting, it's a little bit easier because you can just, do a spiral or something that never hits the exact center where all that bulk is. So here is 3 of these things are the same. 1 of these things is not like the other. You can see this one block has a cream colored background while all those other purples had the same white and blue dotty background. I don't know where the best place to hold that is so that you can see it without the distracting background. But I kind of countered that blue background by having 2 different fabrics. These 2 purples match. These 2 purples are different. So I kind of split the difference between having 3 the same and 1 different, but these 2 are different enough from this that I think it all works together. But that's the fun of a scrappy quilt, is looking at all those different fabrics and seeing what's going on with those. I kind of got off track and didn't sew my blues together. So let's take care of that. Okay, that I can. Okay. I talk to myself. Pull out my black sashing and put that together with this purple. And then I've got piles and piles of stuff and I don't know what I'm doing anymore. So let's finish up the frame on these yellows. And then you can see what the Okay, here's my next dilemma. I've got my blue here. Let me turn this around because these diagonals have the same blue. This top and this bottom blue are the same. And then the backgrounds are the same on this alternate one. So I want to pair it up like that. But you can see this one's a lot smaller than this one. That was my dilemma. But I'll just chop off that extra when I get the block together. So this way to nest. I don't worry about pinning the triangle parts together when I'm sewing the hourglass units because those 2-inch blocks don't really need pins, but once I get the hourglass together and I'm making a 4-patch, I do pin. And then I have my other dark background ready to go. And again, I ended up with one smaller block going together with much bigger units, but I pressed it the wrong way and I couldn't. Lots of decisions here going on in my head as I put things together. I didn't want 2 red sections to go together, which they would have if I had used my original layout the way I pressed it. And you can see that, well, that one actually came out pretty good with my wonky piecing. And here you can see what I said. I wish I had turned this one sideways like this one so that those greens weren't together, but oh well. And I am going this afternoon to deliver a quilt I made to a friend of mine, so that will be fun. I coordinated with her sister, so it's a surprise. That's even more fun. Have you ever given a quilt as a surprise gift? Like baby shower gifts I've done as surprises, but this will be a pretty special delivery. Okay, so there's the one and that has the different red, and I'm going to trim that bottom off so that hourglass may not be symmetrical anymore. Debating on where, if I trim, if I lose points. So that's what I was looking at on this block. If I want to trim down so that those points get cut off, because those points will get lost in the border as well. And here's my blue block that needs to trim because those sizes are different. So the easiest way for me is to trim before I press, because then I've got that guideline to just get rid of the excess there, and then we have a nice square 4 patch to work with. I have a friend who is doing scrappy piecing more like this. She just takes random bits and is sewing them all together. So I was working on that little kind of improv scrappy project this morning. I've done quite a few blocks like this, and then I'll get them kind of going in a log cabin type because I was trying to make 6-inch blocks to use in a really random scrappy everything in the kitchen sink kind of quilt. And I realized after I had done about half a dozen blocks that I really didn't like them. So I'm going to have to like donate all of these partial blocks to that friend that is enjoying completely random scrappy quilting, and see if she wants to continue to finish a project. With some of that stuff, I could sew it all together and just, that's the kind of project that I would probably donate to the Humane Society for pet beds, because I don't like that look. I like to have more of a consistent color story, whether it can be rainbow themed, but I like to keep my colors together in either monochromatic or the classic combination of red and blue, or red and green, or yellow and purple, but like 2 color combinations, not 7 colors. So when you hear the phrase scrapbuster, I asked this question at the beginning. I'd like to come back to that discussion topic. Are you looking for projects that use up a lot of your fabric at once? So like a whole quilt pattern that would go through, 3 and 4 yards of fabric? Or are you just looking for how to do interesting things with little bits, which is what this kind of ends up being, that interesting block from little bits of fabric. So we've almost got the yellow one done. So I will continue working to get that. I'd like to have, one of each. Have a little over an hour together to go. Like I said, I keep these live broadcasts to 2 hours on the first Saturday of the month. Thank you for joining me for our Saturday sew and chat. Gives me a consistent time to work on charity projects. Mostly these will end up as charity quilts. Because I always have good intentions of charity projects and then never actually finish any of them. So, like I said, working consistently on these things, at least the first Saturday of the month, does make good progress. So I hope you have a fun project to be working on as we sit and chat. If you need me to show anything closer up, if you're wondering, if you come in late and are wondering what's going on, just drop a note in the comments and I will give you a close-up view of how things are set up. It is kind of hard to have a good filming set in your home sewing space. I drool over, Missouri Star and Jordan Fabrics and everybody that has a place where they can get good camera angles for both their talking and their sewing machine. I am not that mobile with my setup, so I only have the one camera that I am broadcasting from. Maybe someday. I've told my husband it would be, a dream of mine to have the overhead camera on. And now I'm getting a warning that my battery is low. So I thought I had everything plugged in and it wasn't. So that's fixed. Momentary panic. Thanks for the warning, though, from my computer that my battery wasn't plugged in. All these little things you need to check. Anyway, back to my ideal sewing filming space. I've told my husband I would love to have the backdrop on a track, and I'd love to have an overhead camera, kind of mounted on the wall on a track system so that I could show you guys a little better what I am working on and switch those camera views. So things get a little messy. As I said, I was using long strips to just kind of improv piece my borders. And so you've got those tails hanging out. But I have my first framed hourglass block. So this is now should be close to 6 inches. And it is right at 6 inches. So if I put it in another quilt, it'll come down to 5.5. But yeah, I'm liking how that's coming together. So we'll set that aside. And if you are watching the replay, I want to say thank you to my replay viewers as well. Just drop in the comments a hashtag team replay, and I will see those comments and be able to reach back out to you, answer any questions. I'd love to hear your ideas for future quilt blocks and themes for scrappy quilts. We'll need to do an I Spy project here soon as well. And you know what? I am going to let me reorganize a little bit here. I have some pieces and parts from a different project that I will set aside. Let's see. I can lean over, grab my handy small ruler and rotary cutter. And I said I wasn't going to do this, but I can't handle it anymore with the scissors and the uneven edges. So we will get things set up to be a little more precise. Not as wonky as I thought I could be today. I gave it a good hour test of completely wonky piecing with no rotary cutter, and then I caved and had to grab my rotary cutter. I also need to decide if I want a rolling chair. I've had a bad experience at the quilt store when I was sewing on a rotary chair where I leaned over and it scooted out and I ended up falling, which is pretty embarrassing to fall out of your chair. But so I have a stationary chair right now, but it gets a little awkward to be jumping up and down all the time on that. So you have to let me know how your sewing room is set up. I've got a nice desk unit set up here. So I've got my sewing machine and the cutting surface on one part of the desk. And then it's actually got kind of a dresser unit. So the drawers over here are full of fabric, of course, and I've got more counter space to fill up. And that's where I keep my water and some of my other scrap bins there. And then right behind me, where you saw me reaching for things, that's a second table that is set up as my cutting station. So I kind of back to back, because when I don't do a lot of machine quilting on my domestic, because in the other room I have a long arm. So I've kind of taken over most of the house for my sewing hobby. So I've got my cutting station back to back. But when I did quilt on a domestic machine, I loved having that extra surface to support the quilt as I was trying to quilt on a domestic. And then across the room, I have an ironing station set up, but it is much too hot to run the iron. And since I didn't want to be getting up and out of the camera view too much during the live stream, I just turned the iron off for this morning and do a lot of finger pressing here. So let me get myself all situated to sew some more border strips on my hourglass blocks. So we were talking a little bit earlier about quilt personalities. So tell me some of the classic people that you've met in the quilting world or in your sewing group, or, family members even. If they were the precise piecers, everything had to be, exactly the right size and trimmed and beautiful. If they were more loosey-goosey, if they were the social butterfly and went to talk to everyone. We also have the expert critiquer type people that tend to point out other people's mistakes. I try to keep my mouth shut because I may take them aside. Obviously, I'm not going to make any harsh comments and tell somebody they did that wrong in front of a large group. If someone is asking for feedback, or if I see a block turned completely the wrong way, I may pull them aside and say, hey, did you notice you might want to turn that one around? It looks a little bit backwards. Because we all know that sinking feeling when you've got the whole quilt done and quilted and you realize the mistake and you're just, oh no. Easier to recover from the potential embarrassment of someone pointing out a mistake while it is still easily rectified. But, when people are showing off their work, we need to validate their efforts. If nothing else, even if the design doesn't appeal to us, they put a lot of time and effort into it. So I gush over people's finished projects because I definitely want to be that encouraging person, not the critique negative Nelly. But there are some people who tend to complain about everything. Okay, I'm getting to the final stages on several of these, so you can let me know if my vision is working out. As I just talked about critique, yeah, I do want you to be nice. Oh, Andy, it's beautiful. No, I don't need kind of that. The word that comes to mind is simpering. I don't need you to just, stroke my ego for no reason. But we're not going to get overly harsh, because it is a pretty wild and crazy color scheme idea, and these are very wonky, not precise blocks. So I will lead with that. You don't need to point out that points don't match or got cut off, because I know that. Okay, just had to get my next blocks set up so that I can, because I'm chain piecing, have to have a unit under the needle so that I can take out the previous one. Oh, okay. It's still, my first block is still within reach. I didn't throw it too far off to the side. So we can see if my vision is for this quilt is going to work. So as I have imagined, I will have a third of the blocks across the top with white borders, a third of the blocks in the middle with gray, and a third across the bottom in black, so that we'll have the fun rainbow going on in the middle with the colorful hourglass blocks, and then that gradient border with the different light to dark. So I think that'll be fun. I'm probably going to have to stick to blocks that have light backgrounds. I don't know that I can mix in some of these hourglass that have darker fabrics. So that is one consideration for those. But excuse me, things have fallen on the floor. But I probably have enough of those darker blocks. So then the question becomes, which border do I use for a block with a dark background? Would you put it with a light, or would you put it with a dark? I'm leaning towards the dark, but is that going to make the whole quilt look too dark? We shall see. Yeah, I'm liking that dark background. Okay, and here's the one where things got messed up. You can see the two lights. This should have been turned, but I don't know how I would have done that with the I'd have to put it on the other side, and I was doing that because the nesting. Yeah, oh well, that got. Would you leave it or would you rip it? Because here's the correct version in red, and here is the messed up version in blue. I'm thinking I need to rip it. Hi, Lisa. I'm trying to decide. Correctly pieced shows the pinwheel in the middle. Incorrectly pieced has no pinwheel. But I kind of like the look of those hourglass blocks just being straight across. Lisa's OCD. I'm still undecided. I kind of like the orderly rows here now that I see that and can tell myself that they're orderly rows rather than seeing the mistake. But it doesn't take me too long to rip, so we'll do that and get that nice pinwheel center going in the center of our hourglass blocks. Okay, so our 4 patch is ripped, and I just had to turn one block around and get it pressed the other way. I think I had it pressed correctly, and then I somehow changed my mind in the middle of getting it set up to sew the next seam and switch things around. And I do like to take all the loose threads off that edge. Okay, so what I was doing, I was trying not to have the two same blocks next to each other, but I think that seeing the pinwheel is more important than having different fabrics touching. So we will. Put that together. Okay, I don't know what borders I'm doing yet for those dark backgrounds, so those will get set aside. But this guy is ready to get his borders on. There went my little trash can. Luckily, I have a second one. A friend made these cute little, buckets. In the center is the oilcloth. So it's kind of got a vinyl type. And I find it a handy place to store my Wonder clips. They are clipped to the edge of my little trash bucket. So that's a useful thing to have, unless you make a mess like I did and tip the whole thing over. But messes do clean up eventually. Have you heard the funny saying, a clean house is a sign of a broken sewing machine? That's very much how I feel most of the time. I have too much fabric to use up. I need to keep sewing. Trimming the dog ears so I can do my next little 4 patch of hourglass blocks. So these were all put together from leader ender projects when I had leftover triangles. So and I've been collecting these for years, almost decades. I'm approaching 20 years as a quilter. So I can honestly say I've been collecting half square triangle and hourglass blocks for decades. Now that I have a plan to put them together with those framed borders like this, I need to work through it and get them all to that stage. So, have a plan to get your projects to the next stage, I guess, rather than, just, oh, I'll do it someday. And that's the way we get our UFOs finished. You actually have to work on things too. I'm having a time getting this. It's not, there we go. Getting that block started on the edge for some reason. Sometimes my sewing machine gives me fits and doesn't like to feed the new block through. Even when I am chain piecing and have that I'm looking at my orphan blocks trying to decide. I have 2 different red blocks, so I think I'll keep that the same, because as I was starting to say earlier, I had kind of 3 orphan red blocks and 1 yellow, which fits because a lot of the blocks that I've made already have 3 units the same and 1 different. So I was going to call it that. One of these things is not like the other quilt. Sheila, glad she got back online with us. So yeah, I'm setting those orphan reds aside, and we'll see where we end up. Okay, so now I've got an interesting mix, because these are all kind of orphan reds. This one has 2 different reds. This has one of the same fabrics as this, but a different background. And then this one has a blue, and I just dropped the one on the floor with the brown. So I could have that as a scrappy red block. And then I still have this lone yellow guy that I don't know what I'm doing with, but I wanted to these with black, because I was working on a dark quilt last year. So I always have to remember to put a dark against a light, and that will keep that will help me get a pinwheel in the center when I sew my hourglass blocks together. Just trimming the dog ears here before I piece those. I heard a ding. Okay. Just have to make sure no one in the family is wondering where I ended up. Okay. Every so often after chain piecing, I have to double check my progress. That's ready for a border. This one, almost done with another block. And then the other silly thing, you know, these random thoughts that you get when you're sewing. I need to shift my machine to the other side because right now it's the needle position is too close to the edge of the desk where my legs go. Keep getting off kilter with that. You know, you get a lot of random thoughts when you join my live streams. So thank you for hanging out with me and listening to my random stream of consciousness thought. But these are things you have to consider when you're using a desk as your sewing surface. You have to have that freedom of movement underneath. That's why it would be better to have just a table that doesn't, you're not running into the legs as much. Here's my red. So I don't want to stack these on top. I want my light and my dark to touch. So then I need to turn that around and then I will have a pinwheel in the center. And we can keep going there. So Heidi told us earlier she was off to the Long Beach Quilt Show. I'd love to hear what exciting things people are doing this weekend. Lisa recommends the So Easy table. Yes, I've heard of those. Does that sit into the table or does it just kind of go around your machine? I forget. I've seen the brand before. Oh, and Lisa also has a good question. Do you care if it's batik or regular quilter's cotton? No, I mix. I'm trying to find a block where I have mixed a regular cotton with a batik. They play together beautifully. So I don't care. I mix and match batiks with other quilting fabric all the time, and it works out just fine. A lot of blocks do end up being 100% batik just because I have been working with Island Batik Fabric Company. And so that is, I have a huge stash just of batiks. So I can make 100% batik fabric blocks. But I have no problems. I've mixed and matched batiks with other fabrics my entire quilting career and have never had a problem. Good to know. Easy tables are freestanding tables. So good plan. Let's see, do I have an interesting mix of fabrics? No, I'm not. I was putting these from my stack that I don't have 4 similar color combination. That's a little too crazy for me. So we will set those aside until I get to similar color combinations to put together. Let's see, what am I going to do with my blues? Those. Need a white border, but I cut 2 different sizes of border strips, and so yes, I know I'll mess up my quilt where some blocks have larger settings. So put that aside, Andy, stick to the plan. And here's our problem of not cutting your squares to a consistent size. I had smaller blue squares and bigger blue squares, and so now my pinwheel doesn't sit nicely together, but I can't do anything about it now because I've already trimmed the other side. So we're just going to have an oopsie block. The humility square, is that what we should call it when we make a mistake? Ta-da! Another framed hourglass block to go in the done pile. I can't wait to show you this one with my dark fabrics. Let me sew a couple more seams and then I can show it off and talk about it. It was one of my favorite collections last year from Island Boutique. Okay, so these dark fabrics, nice tones of gray that I have paired with a black solid. These are from the collection Sticks and Stones by Jean Wells, I want to say, for Island Boutique, and this was a collection from 2021. So it should be in stores. You should still be able to find some. It's called Sticks and Stones, and it's got those lovely grays with really, there's some round like pebble looking, and obviously the sticks and some leaves and things, feather almost looking fabric. Really, really cool if you like those darker color schemes. So that was one of my favorite prints, like I said, last year when I was working with Island Boutique. One of my favorite collections. So do you buy fabric by collection? Are there certain fabric designers that that you follow? Do we have any Tula Pink lovers or Kay Fassett fans? They are two of my favorite modern designers. They work for Free Spirit Fabrics. Kathy Engel does a lot of cool designs for Island Boutique. Love her work. Trying to decide on borders here. That's why I'm kind of a little quiet. And as I said, when I think about it, I like to spin my seams anytime I have a 4-patch coming together. So it shows up nicely on this red block, red and white. And it makes, when you spin the seams, you're opening up the center, and that way those two seams can go in opposite directions. And now all my seams from the main 4-patch, ignore the diagonals there, spin clockwise. I even managed to spin that one in the hourglass block too. So you can see it makes a cute little 4-patch. This one makes a cute little pinwheel. It's not laying flat enough really for you to get a good view of the pinwheel there in the center. Just little things about quilting that make me happy. Okay, we have about 30 minutes here of our live stream. Thank you for hanging out this morning. I go live on the first Saturday of the month here at True Blue Quilts on YouTube. You can mark your calendars. I can't give you an exact time because it really depends on if my family has anything going on, if I can get online in the morning. Sometimes it pushes to the early afternoon, depending on what we have going on around the house. Anyone else with teenagers knows that a lot of times you can't get anything going too early. So they're sleeping in. Okay, back to some. As I said, I try to keep with a consistent color scheme, and I was really thrilled about how those 3 blocks work together, because you've got 2 teals, 2 yellows. I need to find a 4th one that doesn't look too out of place if I put it with that. I don't know if I could get away with something with a brown background in there. I think that looks too different from the others, but maybe we'll see. I don't know. Just keep playing. I'm sure in my bucket of hourglass blocks that I have got others with yellow and teal, so we won't worry about it too much. And then we're going to get another wild combination of blocks here with my greens. So I will just tease you a little bit about that. Totally random hourglass block. trimming dog ears and getting things ready to sew my next block together. And now I'm using my initial block to trim. One of the other blocks was way oversized. So, there you go. Like I said, I need to pull out my AccuQuilt and see if I have a die that is a good size to trim some of these oversized blocks down together. It's one of those things, you start collecting dies, and I don't use it to cut for every quilt, so I don't know what I have and what the best kind of workflow with an AccuQuilt is. It's kind of one of those things that you want to plan your whole quilt ahead of time, which is hard for me with scrappy projects. As you can see with this one, it just kind of grows. I get a basic idea for the borders that I want, and then I just make all the other decisions as I go. And I like to sew one block at a time, so I rarely cut for an entire quilt up front. I tend to cut for 1 or 2 blocks and sew, and then go back to the cutting table. Whereas with the AccuQuilt, you want to get it out and have enough space to work. So it's, once you've gone to all the trouble to get it set up, you want to cut larger pieces at one time. So, or larger amounts of fabric. The AccuQuilt, you're not cutting large pieces. Usually you're using it to cut very small pieces. I'm glad to see so many friendly faces showing up for our live sewing session. I've been scrap busting with my bin of hourglass blocks, and this one turned out really wonky because I did not trim my individual hourglasses. I just kind of grabbed random pieces, trimmed the edges, and we're seeing where that leads us. Ooh, maybe I'll put that. Oh yeah. The theme has been trying to keep things scrappy within a monochromatic or 2-color color scheme, and I was having trouble with some of my orphan blocks. I had several when I cut pieces from one quilt project, I end up with similar blocks that I can put together in a 4-patch. But then I have some of these that I'm calling orphans that are just one-of-a-kind color combinations. And I finally found 4 different blocks that are going to play together nicely in a hourglass 4-patch. So let me get that put together, and I'm trying to trim things so that they turn out a little better than that one wonky block I showed you. But this is just a scrap project for, I'll, probably donate it to Project Linus or something. Kids or pets that won't care too much if they've got some points that don't match up quite right. Which is not to say you should just, throw any random mistake-filled project to charity, because who cares? I'm not saying that at all. You should always try to do your best work, but I also give myself quite a bit of grace when things don't turn out exactly perfect. So weekend plans here. Let's see, reading from the comments, Sheila is sharing that she is using up 2.5-inch squares. Oh, my favorite. I love, love, love 2.5-inch squares, because, you can just put them together in fun 9 patches and it looks great. And she's turning them into half square triangles to make dog beds. Very nice. Quilt as you go. That is a good method to just get things done. And I'm sure the shelters and pet owners that you're making them for appreciate all your work, Sheila. Let's see, trying to get these. Why am I reaching way over to trim when I could just put the scrap bucket, trash bucket on my lap and trim things down that way? So I've got one bucket that has all hourglass units, and then I've got another bucket that is all half square triangles, because I started off using my extra triangles to make pinwheels. But when you sew your half square triangles for pinwheels, you're sewing along the diagonal of the square, and that it was making smaller squares than sewing along one of the short edges for hourglass blocks, if that makes sense. And I didn't want to end up with all these 1-inch pinwheels, so I changed to a different unit. So we will eventually, I'll have to go back to the pinwheels and see what I've got. We have a group that meets and has a late night sewing session, so that might be a good project for that evening to sometime to I was about to run into the same problem that I had done before, where I didn't create a pinwheel in the center because I didn't plan my fabric placement as carefully as I should have. This is going to be another one where, well, let's see, maybe we go with a green. I didn't trim my oversized block. And so let me get this together and I'll show you why I turned it around and changed my mind. Movies. We haven't talked about movies. Did you see any of the summer blockbusters? I still, I'm an action adventure lover, so I do enjoy the Marvel movies, so I've got to get out and see Thor. We saw the Top Gun Maverick movie this summer, the Jurassic World sequel, so lots of fun movies. And Elvis, we saw that a couple weeks ago. That was excellent. I don't watch movies in the sewing room, though. I tend to just work to the hum of the sewing machine. Okay, here's the messed up block that I was telling you about. I wanted these 3 random colors to be in the center, but if I turned this around, this pinwheel would not have met at the center because this was an oversized block, and when I trimmed it, I didn't pay attention to where that seam would be. So here is my kind of random, super scrappy green hourglass block. And you can see how this fits the theme in several different ways of one of these things is not like the other, because this background is different from all the other blocks. This has one blue section, and this has all 4 pieces different. So kind of my idea of everything in the kitchen sink going into one scrappy green block. Pop that seam open in the back so we can reduce some of the bulk on this. Sometimes you want to go in with a seam ripper to get some of those stitches out of the center so that you can go. And here's another wonky. This is much more my controlled scrappy style. You can see that the darker blues are the same, and then I have a pair of lighter blues, but I was able to pair things up. And Lisa is suggesting pressing seams open for almost everything, and I agree. I do need to get into that habit. I do on some projects, and then I forget, and a lot of times half square triangles I press to the dark, so, and then they end up bulky at the end, so I need to get into that habit of pressing everything open and just not worrying about it. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left, so if you have any burning questions, please speak up or leave them in the chat. Team Replay, I have not forgotten about you. You can always reach out to me in the comments or info@truebluequilts.com, and I will get back to you if you have any questions. Techniques, pressing seams open on flying geese. Yes, that would be another case where you might have to be the exception to the pressing open rule. following my own advice and planning the color placement, or double checking the color placement, I should say. And I'm glad I did, because I was about to sew it wrong. So let me, a minute of prior planning saves some ripping. As I said, I was adding these borders. I did not cut my strips to size. I'm just working with width of fabric border strips. And so I just, improv cut once it's sewn on. So I will have to go back and trim all these blocks up to size, but there is that pretty dark block that I said I just loved. The this alternate fabric is Sticks and Stones from Island Boutique. So there's a darker block, and I'll have to lay all these blocks out and put a picture up for you guys who have stuck with me all morning. It's been fun chatting with everybody. And so tell me, what is your favorite scrappy Stashbuster block to make? I like, obviously, with my hourglass units, that's how I use up those random bits of fabric and half square triangles. Sheila was talking about using 2.5-inch squares. I love to work with 2.5-inch squares also, especially when you make half square triangles out of the 2.5-inch squares, and then you can put them together in all sorts of fun ways. I have a free series on my website, truebluequilts.com, that shows you 9 different 9-patch blocks. So if you want to check that out, hop over to truebluequilts.com, scroll down about halfway down the page, and you'll see the 9-patch sampler if you want to give that a try. And then here's my other kitchen sink block where everything was different. So there you can see how I sewed a block onto my width of fabric strip, and I will just trim off the extra so I can still use that strip. And I have a pretty blue scrappy hourglass block that got a little wonky, but that's kind of the charm sometimes of your improv scrappy piecing, to end up with some wonky stuff. Let's see, what else can I get finished here in our last few minutes together. Drink your water. One year, I decided that I wanted to enter the scrap category at my Guild's annual quilt show. So I made a pinwheel quilt where every pinwheel block was a different color. Because they had the guidelines for a scrappy quilt, they said you had to use at least 75 different fabrics. So that was a fun challenge. I did not win, but I had fun in the effort. Lisa's not a scrappy person. I know it can be hard. I really don't like the wild every color under the sun in every block. I like a much more controlled palette, but I do like scrappy quilts. So I will go find 5 different blues to use in my blue blocks. Okay, chain piecing. Let's see. Okay, so here was the kitchen sink. This is when I just said I like to have a controlled scrappy palette. You know, every so often you have to break your own rules. Live on the edge. Here is my random block. As soon as I get that center open, pop those seams in the center. Get your seams spinning around, and I less bulk there in the center until we learn to follow Lisa's advice and press everything open. Okay, here is my kitchen sink block. Get it up there so the camera focuses on all those different colors. So, but again, it's controlled scrappy. It works with the theme. I've got reddish here, and this fabric is an orange, but it comes across as kind of red there. These 2 blocks have teal. This is a yellow background that's different from everything else. This is a creamier background, but all the backgrounds are different there, but they're in that same kind of cream, yellow, tan family. And then I've got 2 that are more reddish and 2 that are more teal. So sticking with that 2 color option. Thanks, Jody. Nice to see you. Yeah, I like this. This is about as wild as I get with scrappiness. There has to be some kind of consistency, and pairs work together. I'm a Libra. I like things to be balanced. So having pairs of colors works for me. So let me have a final, well, let's see, we have time. Let me sew a couple more, and then we will have a final show and tell as we wrap up here close to noon. I do a 2-hour live sewing on the first Saturday of every month. So you can go back if you just want some quilt chatter in the background and don't mind my rambling. You can find those previous Scrappy Saturday sewing sessions from previous months. And I plan to be back here in September. I can't believe it's August 2022 already. This year has just been flying by. Sometimes those corners on those blocks don't want to come together. Oh, I was losing my train of thought. I start on a new block and I remember that I just wanted to alternate so that I could get this red one finished with its dark border. Do I have? And then you end up sad when your border strip doesn't fit. So we grab another. That's why I cut several long strips. Lisa's asking in the chat how many blocks I got done. We will take a look. Let me sew this final seam. And we will see what today's tally is. Just trimming this one. Okay, I trimmed my dog ears from my hourglass blocks. I'm putting the red side next to the white side so that I can keep consistent and have that pinwheel in the center of our 4-patch. And then I framed them with, and someone early on in the chat asked how big everything was. These hourglass units are about 2 inches. So then the 4-patch becomes 4 inches, and I added an inch on the border. So these are 6-inch, 6-inch unfinished. So they're going to be 5.5 inch when I get them all sewn together. If I stick with that size sashing, I may change my mind halfway through. We'll see. So here's my handful of blocks, and we'll have a quick show and tell. The goal was to use a white, gray, and black border on my hourglass blocks so that I have a gradient down the quilt in the sashing with my rainbow blocks. So I have my really wonky blue, I've got my dark grays, got my red and white, so that's 3. I have a yellow and white. I have a green. Sheila's making different layouts for each block with her 6 inches. And that's great. I love sampler quilts where every block is different. I just, like I said, I had a bin. I've been collecting these hourglass units, using up my the triangles that I get cut off of binding and other half square triangle flying geese type projects. I just throw them in a bucket and it's time to do something with them. So there's another set of 3. So that was 6 for the day. And then I managed to get another green block with that one standout that doesn't have the cream colored alternate triangle. So that was kind of fun. So that was 7 with borders. And then I have 4 blocks done that don't have borders. So that's 11. I had my red and teal. I have a red and blue. I have a green, creamy one, and my blue and peach. So those will get framed at some point. Now that I have a plan, like I said, for years and years, I've just been making hourglass units. I have a full bucket. It's time to keep going. So now that I've got my border strips cut and a plan to do all of them, I can work on 4 patches and on borders. So I will keep doing that. And eventually, someday down the road, you will see a finished hourglass quilt. So thank you so much for hanging out with me as we sit and sew on the first Saturday of the month. I will see you next month. Have a great day.